Yeah. Srividya, you can start recording.
Yes, I just started. Thanks, Srini.
Great. Thank you. Good evening. Welcome to this community town hall with retired Minnesota Supreme Court Justice Alan Page and Minneapolis Fed President Neel Kashkari for a rich and interactive conversation on closing Minnesota's achievement gaps by amending the Constitution to establish a fundamental right for a quality public education for all children in the state. I'm Srini Chekka, President of the India Association of Minnesota. It is indeed an honor to have these two distinguished luminaries and many of our community members with us here tonight. We thank Justice Page and President Kashkari for championing this push to address large disparities in income, job opportunities, and other areas to the powerful tool of quality public education. The pandemic movement for social and racial justice and the related impacts make this idea even more urgent and relevant now. We are eager to hear from them and the community this evening. Our agenda for this evening, I'm going to do brief introductions and also an overview of IAM. Justice Page and Neel are going to talk about the proposed constitutional amendment. There is a Q&A moderated by Siley, our IAM board member and executive director of ASHA USA, and closing remarks by Srividya, IAM General Secretary. Some quick housekeeping rules. This session is being recorded. All participants are set on mute. And also big thanks to our community members for submitting a rich set of thoughts and questions ahead of this meeting during the registration process. Siley synthesized the themes and will engage in a dialogue with Justice Page and Neel. We do encourage you to submit additional questions in your chat window, and time permitting, Siley will pose those questions to our guests. So, brief introductions of our chief guests. Alan Page received his BA in political science from the University of Notre Dame in 1967 and his JD from the University of Minnesota Law School in 1978, becoming the first African-American on the Minnesota Supreme Court and one of the few associate justices ever to join the court initially through election rather than appointment by the governor. When Justice Page was reelected in 1998, he became the biggest vote getter in Minnesota history. He was reelected in 2004 and 2010 and served until he reached the mandatory age of 70 in 2015. For all the football fans out there, Alan was a first-round draft choice of the Minnesota Vikings in 1967 and played for the Vikings until 1978. He was named NFL's most valuable player in 1971 and also was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Justice Page and his wife, Diane, founded the Page Education Foundation, which assists Minnesota students of color in their pursuit of post-secondary education. In November 2018, Justice Page received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Trump. In 2019, he was chosen as a member of the NFL's 100th anniversary all-time team. Welcome, Justice Page.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Neel Kashkari took office as President and Chief Executive Officer of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis in 2016. Raised in Ohio, Kashkari earned his bachelor's and master's degrees in mechanical engineering at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and his MBA from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. He began his career as an aerospace engineer and later joined Goldman Sachs in San Francisco, where he helped tech companies raise capital and pursue strategic transactions. From 2006 to 2009, Kashkari served in several senior positions at the U.S. Department of the Treasury. He's well known for his work with the Troubled Assets Relief Program during the financial crisis. And Neel received the Alexander Hamilton Award, the Treasury Department's highest honor for distinguished service. Following his tenure in Washington, Kashkari returned to California and joined PIMCO. In 2014, he ran for governor of California on a platform focused on economic opportunity. Also, big congratulations to the Kashkari family for being blessed with a baby boy just about a month ago. Welcome, President Kashkari.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you.
IAM Government Relations Chair Shanti Shah and I were at the community conversation kickoff held at the Federal Reserve in January of this year and got to hear firsthand from many community leaders on the need to do more to close the achievement gaps. We are grateful to be part of this movement for change today. I'll do a very quick overview of IAM. India Association of Minnesota is a 47-year-old umbrella organization representing 55,000 Asian Indians and 50 plus partner organizations that represent various cultural, regional, service, spiritual, religious, and social causes all across the community. All the work we do is based on our value pillars. We promote culture, provide charity, and build connections. IAM is relevant, particularly in times of this pandemic, as we leverage our platform to pool resources and amplify the value of the altruistic work done by our partner organizations to help the broader Minnesota community. There are, as I mentioned, more than 55,000 Asian Indians all across Minnesota, highly educated workforce, strong consumer power, and very active and vibrant community. Brief highlights about the work IAM did in 2020. A lot of our focus has gone towards various initiatives and causes. On the civic engagement side, we were a complete count committee and worked very closely with the Census Bureau and our coalition of about 7 partner organizations to help make sure all Minnesotans completed the census counts. And Minnesota, as you all know, had the highest self-reporting count in the nation. We also worked very actively on vote by mail, and we called our effort as Spice the Vote. We have been advocating for an India Day bill and also worked on a St. Paul resolution. And here we are talking about the education amendment. A lot of our work in 2020 has gone towards providing COVID-19 relief efforts. And I have a separate slide where I'm going to quickly talk about that work. We've also been doing some work in the social and racial justice, particularly around educating the community and providing awareness. We also have a very rich internship program with 14 interns who are developing into great young leaders. All the work we do is also supported by various events we conduct, and you can see a list of the events here. Just want to quickly highlight some of the work that we've done as a coalition, the Asian Indian Community Coalition around COVID-19. So we raised close to about $120,000 and are continuing to raise more money to do impactful work across food, PPE, and many other areas. You can see some of the numbers here around the work that the coalition has done using the funds we raised. And we have about 200 plus volunteers that worked on various efforts, providing food, meals, groceries to many food banks and pantries. Also, a lot of PPE to healthcare facilities all across Minnesota. And the work continues, and we are continuing to help those in need. A quick token of appreciation for our many partner organizations. And also want to just quickly call out some of the work we've been doing in the social and racial justice space. We've done a lot of work to address the unconscious biases of community members, a speaker series to raise awareness around the social and racial justice topic. We've been working with organizations in North Minneapolis to distribute masks and also do community service. And at this time, I invite Justice Page and President Kashkari to deliver their remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is Neel. I'm really pleased to be with you this evening. I also want to call out 2 of my colleagues, or I just looked in the Zoom, are with us. Beth Commerce is very actively involved in this project. And then Anusha Nath is a PhD economist who is in our research department, who's done a lot of research on education disparities. And hi, Anusha, I can see her now, has been very involved in helping us do the research that goes underneath the work that led to this amendment. And so I just want to acknowledge both of those. And if some of the specific questions come up, I may turn to either of them. So I just want you to know that they're there. I've been president of Minneapolis Fed for 5 years, almost 5 years in January. And one of my surprises moving to Minnesota was to discover these terrible education gaps that we have here. I'd done some homework on Minnesota before I moved here. And I knew that on average, Minnesota has a very educated workforce. On average, Minnesota has very good schools. So I naively assumed that everybody in Minnesota would be doing better. I mean, I knew that there'd be ranges, but I thought even the people who are less fortunate in Minnesota would be relatively better off because the state on average is so successful. And what Anusha and others helped me to understand is that's just not true. Minnesota has some of the worst economic disparities in the country and some of the worst education disparities. And really education, it's that education disparity that leads to all of these other disparities that we are familiar with, economic disparities, healthcare, et cetera. The root of so many of those really comes down to a lack of educational opportunity. So I asked Anusha and our colleagues at the Minneapolis Fed to help me understand why those gaps exist, what has been done to close these gaps, and what can we learn from other states. And what we've learned is that there have been many attempts in the past 20 or 30 years to try to improve education equity in Minnesota. And if we're honest with each other, we have made zero progress in closing these gaps. And when you look around the country, some other states have made real progress. This is not an impossible problem to solve. Sometimes you'll meet people who say, well, it's not education. You have to first solve poverty. That is simply not true. Other states have made real progress in improving education outcomes for their neediest children. And guess what? They still have poverty in those states. I mean, don't get me wrong. I would love to solve poverty. But as Alan always points out to me, solving education is probably the most powerful tool we have to solve poverty. So as we looked at this, we realized that what we're seeing is really a lack of political will. We have a divided state. We have Republicans in Minnesota have their preferred solutions on education. Democrats have their preferred solutions. They tend not to agree. And so what are we left with? The status quo. They make minor changes around the margins, no fundamental change. And so I was wondering, how is there a way we could use the legal system to break through this political logjam and literally put children first and transform education in Minnesota? So a couple of years ago, I reached out to Justice Page, both because of his 22 years on the Supreme Court and because I knew by reputation he had a lifetime of passion for education and education equity. And I asked him, is there a way that we could use the law to put children first? And we looked at the Constitution and we learned that, and we'll show you, I don't know, do we have the language that we're going to show? I don't know, Beth, if you know. We looked at the Minnesota Constitution today has an education provision that basically says children have, here it is, on the right. The Minnesota Constitution today says that children basically have the right to accessing an adequate education system. Well, what does that mean, accessing an adequate education system? It's an education system that on average is adequate. For some, it's terrific. For others, it's lousy. And on average, it's adequate. And if your child gets access to that system, their rights are met. Whether they're at the top of that system or the bottom of that system, the law doesn't care. Well, guess what? Our education system is delivering what the Constitution has designed it to deliver. It's great for some, it's lousy for others. So what Justice Page and I and Anusha and our colleagues looked at was, let's look at all 50 states and what we can learn from their constitutional provisions. This language that on the right was written in 1857 when slavery was still legal in much of America, and it has not changed since then. What we believe, and I'll let Alan go through the language because he's the constitutional scholar, not me. What we believe is that by raising the standard to create a civil right for a quality public education for all children, that this will literally put children first as the priority of our state. And it will hold the state accountable to delivering those outcomes for all children in Minnesota. And we think this can be the catalyst for transformational change over time so that 20 years from now, we're not having the same discussion. So with that, let me turn it over to Justice Page.
Thank you, Neel. I would just point out, Neel referenced the fact that this current constitutional languages from 1857. I mean, if you just stop and think what 1857 was like, or might have been like, and compare that to where we are today, we need a constitution that is meant for today, that gives us the tools necessary to prepare our children for the world that we live in today. The current language focuses on the education system and on funding that system. Our proposed amendment would shift that focus to include children and their families. And when Neel talks about putting children first, we literally do that with this constitutional language. All children have a fundamental right to a quality public education. And it should not be lost that when we say all children, we mean just that. Not just some children, but all children. African American children, Native American children, South Asian children, whatever one's ethnicity or culture, all of those children, wealthy children, but also poor children, disabled children. I mean, literally all children means just that. All children have a fundamental right to a quality public education, not to an adequate public education system. And I would emphasize again, the current language focuses on the system and adequacy. We are talking about a quality public education for all children, and an education that fully prepares those children with the skills necessary for participation in the economy, our democracy, and our society. That's really the standard to be met. A quality public education that fully prepares children for participation. The language goes on to note that in order to determine whether the standard is being met, we say as measured against uniform achievement standards set forth by the state. And let's not conflate the measurement tool, how we measure whether the quality standard is being met, with the quality standard itself. Those are two separate and distinct things. And we think it's important that we have a measurement tool that is uniform and that is used across the board, so that one group of children isn't subject to a lesser standard and others are required to meet a higher standard, that all children are measured by the same standard. It is a paramount duty of the state to ensure quality public schools that fulfill this fundamental right. That, to me, is that sentence, to me, is maybe the second most important. And I say second most important only because putting children first is most important. But right now, the Constitution provides that the legislature has a role in setting education policy and funding the education system. Our proposed amendment would make it a paramount duty That is to say, the state would have no higher duty to ensure quality public schools, and it becomes a state responsibility. So that the legislature has a role, the state, the executive branch has a role, and the judicial branch has a role. And I would note that, you know, the proposed amendment would create a civil right. Well, a civil right without a remedy is not much of a right. And this last sentence makes clear that one is entitled to a remedy when one's civil right has not been fulfilled. And so we think this language will be a catalyst for real change. It will bring children and families together, give them a voice that they don't have now. They will have to be listened to in a way that they don't have to be listened to now. Bring them together with legislators, with educators, with policymakers across the board to develop an educational system that will ensure that the gaps that we see today, we're not here talking about them 20 years from now. Neel?
Thank you, Alan. And I would just add, you know, why do I care about this? And I know Alan and I spent a lot of time together in the last couple of years. Why does Alan care about this? It's from our own personal experiences. My parents came to the US from India about 55 years ago. I was very fortunate. My parents were highly educated. My dad was a professor of engineering at the local university. My mom was a doctor at the local hospital. And as you know, what it's like growing up, I would assume for many of you in an Indian household, education is number one priority for the family. And so growing up in that environment where education was such a priority has opened every door of opportunity to me in this country. So I think it's a national shame that so many children don't have the same opportunity that I had growing up, just by virtue of what household they're born into, what neighborhood their parents can afford to live in. You know, people with means, like I'm guessing many people on this call, choose neighborhoods that have better schools, right? And so that's a huge advantage. And so to me, education should be the great equalizer in our society. We're not going to guarantee equal outcomes for everybody, but I do believe in guaranteeing equal opportunity. And that starts with getting a good education for all of our children. Now, the other thing that Alan and I have in common, I think Alan's story is similar. It's just earlier. He grew up in Canton, Ohio. I grew up in Akron, Ohio, by coincidence. And you know, when he tells his story, he talks about his parents also putting the focus on education. And so, how do we create this opportunity for all the children who don't have it today? That's what this is about.
That's absolutely what it's about. As Neel pointed out, I grew up in Canton, Ohio in the 1950s when segregation, state-sponsored segregation, was present in a large part of our country. Not in Ohio, but we didn't have state-sponsored segregation, but we were segregated nonetheless. I was 8 years old when Brown versus the Board of Education was decided. And that case for me highlighted the power that the law can have in terms of creating equality, equal opportunity. You know, certainly all the promise of Brown hasn't been met, but we've come a long way from 1954 when Brown was decided. And I too had the benefit of parents who knew and understood the importance and value of education. They made it clear to me that in no uncertain terms that if I wanted to have a better life than they had, they weren't able to go to school beyond high school. They made it clear to me that I had to be educated, that I had to be prepared. that education was a tool that would allow anyone to reach their full potential and to achieve whatever their hopes and dreams might be. And it seems to me that certainly given all the good fortune that I've had through the use of education, I have some responsibility to try to ensure that every child have those same opportunities.
So we'd be pleased to open it up to questions in the discussion.
Yes, thank you very much, Justice Page and Neel, for sharing not only the information about the amendment, but also your personal stories. I'm sure everybody learned a lot from that. So we have a list of questions based on what people submitted beforehand and what the team discussed. So I'm going to start with the first question. As we are talking about the fundamental right to quality education for all children, whether they are white, African American, Native American, South Asian, we know that there is so much diversity, not only between the groups, but also within each group, right? Let me take an example of Asian Indian community. So as you know, Asian Indian community in Minnesota is so diverse. And we are referred to as a salad bowl rather than as a melting pot. And by that, we not only look different shades of brown, but we come from different parts of India, eat different foods, speak different languages, celebrate different faiths. But as you mentioned, we all have one common thing, and that is we value academic excellence and educational achievements for our kids. So let's say if you have 5 Asian Indian kids in a classroom, it is not wrong to say that um, uh, uh, the emphasis that the parents put on or expect from their kids is only academic excellence. However, their background is so different. So the teachers in the school are hardly aware of this diversity or, where the kids are coming from, especially students of color. And there's a need for educators to be exposed to training in ethnic studies so that they are better prepared for teaching in a diverse classroom. So, will there be a recommendation for that kind of professional development training in this new amendment to improve the quality of a student's educational experience?
Alan, you want to start with that one? You've talked about this before.
Well, I'm a believer that we have to educate the individual child. And so each individual child has different needs. And it seems to me that that is critical to changing outcomes. Right now, we have this one size fits all that doesn't either acknowledge or even seemingly understand that, children come from different backgrounds and that those different backgrounds, they would perform better if there was some acknowledgement of who they were, where they come from in the classroom where they're learning. And it's also important that the people in the classroom teaching understand and be able to relate to the people who are in the classroom. One of the things we tend to like to do, or tend to do as we sit here today, is we have an education system and we teach the children to perform to the system. Well, we need to be able to teach the children that are in the classroom, not the children we would like in the classroom. And that means teachers who are prepared to teach those who are there, not the ideal student, which is the system is designed to work for. And that means that I think at the end of the day, teacher education will have to change. How we go about teaching will have to change. What we teach will have to change.
You know, I'm just building on what Alan said, and I'm seeing some of the questions that are coming in the chat. One thing just to set, to be clear about, the amendment does not prescribe the solution. It does not say this should be the curriculum, this should be the class size, this should be the structure of the teaching, or this should be the education of the teachers. It's neutral, so all possible solutions are there. Because the truth is, as the question said, first of all, different kids in different parts of the state may have different needs. Different kids in an individual classroom may have different needs. And so what we don't want to do is say, this is the one solution for every child in Minnesota. What we want to do instead is create the civil right on a child by child basis so that the school systems need to adapt to meet the needs of the individual child, whatever they may be. So yes, it can support investment in teacher training to make sure that the teachers understand the children that are in the classroom. It could support different enrollment options. It could support all sorts of flexibility. I mean, one thing to point out is that Alan and I are not teachers. We don't sit here saying we should prescribe the solution. We think the parents and the teachers together should decide the solutions. We want to make this the state's highest duty, to give them the tools that they need and the emphasis that they need so that they can achieve what they need to for those kids.
Thank you. So related to that, the next question was about the need for more educators of color in Minnesota classrooms, but I think you already answered that. So I'm going to move on. Is it possible to talk about quality education for all kids without addressing systemic racism? Now, if we do not talk about systemic racism, we will not be referring to the elephant in the room, so to say. So in recent months, especially, there has been a lot of discussions around this topic. So do you think this amendment will help us in that direction?
I think it absolutely will help in that direction, in that in order for the education system, or in order for a child to be fully prepared for participation in the economy, democracy, and society, that is to say, to receive a quality public education, the racism that exists in the system, which is systemic, will have to be addressed. Right now, there is no real good vehicle for addressing systemic racism. I think by putting children first and the needs of children first, if in fact, as we believe, that there is systemic racism that is holding children back, that should be one of the first things to go under this proposal. Because they will have to, there will have to be a way, there will have to, in order to meet the quality standard, systemic racism cannot be a part of it. And as I say, this, our proposed amendment becomes a catalyst for changing the system at its core. As Neel pointed out, the current constitutional language, which was from 1857 when slavery was rampant, it is doing what it was designed to do.
Neel, would you like to?
Just, it reminded me that some legislators, so where are we in our process? How do you amend the Constitution? We need the state House and the state Senate, a majority, simple majority, to pass it, and then it'll go to the voters on a general election ballot. So we're ramping up to try to advocate for this in the January session. And then if they pass it, it'll go on the ballot November 2022. And we think if this gets before the voters in Minnesota, it will pass overwhelmingly. Some legislators have expressed some nervousness because they say, we're afraid the courts will step in and impose a solution on us that we don't like. Maybe the court will make us spend more money. And we say, look, once this passes, the legislature and the governor will have the first opportunity with the people, with the parents and the teachers, to design the new education system for the future of Minnesota. And only if you fail will there be a need for some family to say my child's rights are being violated and go to court. So the first instance, it is up to the elected leaders with their constituents to say, this is what we want the new education system of the future to look like. And so don't be scared by that. It's an opportunity. This is a catalyst to force that change. And one legislator said to us, one senior legislator, I'm not going to name him, said, well, if that's the case, then we don't need this. We can do it on our own. And I said, that's great. What have you been waiting for? Why haven't you done it? Why do we have the worst education gaps in the country? I didn't get a very good answer back to that question.
Thank you. So, that brings us to another question, which we have got quite a few comments about in the chat, as well as questions that were submitted beforehand. And that is about how are we going to measure this quality that we're talking about? So when we say quality education, we're talking about teaching, we are talking about assessment and so many different things, resources. So how is that going to work? Like, what metrics do we use to measure quality?
That again is something that, well, let me back up. The tool that we use today, standardized tests, standardized testing, is an ineffective tool for measuring whether children are prepared. Not only is it an ineffective tool for measuring where they are at the given snapshot when the test is taken, but it's also not a tool that is utilized to map out a course for progress down the road. It's my belief, and I think Neel would agree, that when the amendment passes and becomes part of the Constitution, those constituent groups will come together and sort out precisely what tool it is that does measure whether a child is fully prepared for participation. As Neel noted, we aren't prescribing A, B, or C. We'll leave that to the experts. But those measurement tools do exist, but they're not being used today. And if they, I was just going to say, and if they develop a tool that doesn't actually accurately measure whether a child is being prepared, then again, children and families would have a remedy to have the tool that's not doing its job replaced.
The question of this measurement is, and what quality, how do you measure quality, is probably the thing that gets the most questions. People are very interested. It's a complex issue. We recognize that. But here's why it's so important. If you talk to the education leaders in Minnesota today, many of them will point to graduation gaps that are closing as evidence that we're making progress. The gap between white and black graduation rates, or white and Hispanic, or Asian and Hispanic, those gaps are closing over time. But if you talk to Anusha and she digs into the data and you look at measurements of college readiness, we're not making any progress. So you know what that means? We're graduating students who are not prepared. And if you talk to anybody, any college administrator, they will tell you so many students show up either at community college or a four-year college unprepared for their coursework. And then they have to spend the first year or more in remediation. So if we're not careful, we could just graduate everybody and say problem solved. 100% graduation rate, problem solved. And we would have accomplished nothing. And that's why it's so important that we build this standard in the Constitution. Although Alan and I are not prescribing what the tool is, the teachers and the parents together will decide that with the legislators. But it's vitally important that it be included so that we don't just simply graduate everybody and pretend that we've accomplished something.
And I would just add to that, it is not only that we're not graduating children that are college ready, we're not graduating children that are work ready. And so we're failing on two fronts.
Yes, exactly. Actually, that's where my next question was leading to. People have asked that we are every day, we are moving towards globalization, but our schools are not educating our kids to deal with the new workplace. And the 21st century cutting edge career programs need to be put in place so that kids not only get textbook education, but also they learn life skills that will help them in their careers. So that's what people have asked. Yeah.
And ultimately, this is going to put power in the hands of families that do not have power today. And then all of the above, all of these suggestions that you are asking about or you're offering, those are all worthwhile ideas. And having parents and families having power in the process can empower them to go drive for that change. But just to repeat ourselves, Alan and I are not the ones to prescribe what that is. It's the families that should decide what it is that their children need.
So the question that underlies all this is, how do we, as you said, as parents or school board members, teachers, educators, give a voice to some of these concerns and be a part of setting standards and policies at school levels, so that our voice is heard, and instead of feeling helpless by the system, we feel empowered, especially suburbs or inner city schools where this parent participation is lacking. How can we do that? Or another question that I just saw was, how can we, the public, help you in this whole process of amendment?
Well, we need your voice and we need your political advocacy. The Federal Reserve, we don't lobby, we don't hire lobbyists, but an independent campaign has been formed, a bipartisan group called Our Children, that are organizing grassroots, they're organizing parents, they're organizing teachers to go out and formally advocate for this. And so Beth and our team can connect you to them. That would be a natural way for you all to get involved. But if the people of Minnesota demand this change, they will get the change. And it's going to be up to the people of Minnesota to demand this change.
Let your legislators hear your voices.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I think you have answered most of the questions that we got. There are some more questions along the same lines. So it looks like we have a few more minutes. This one is about mental health of children and teens and students in general, and also concern about police presence in the school. So when it comes to discipline, when it comes to other issues, what would you say about that? And will this amendment help in that kind of reform?
Well, again, I think it's a case of ensuring that each individual child gets the education they need. And if there are mental health issues, it strikes me that that would be a consideration in ensuring that that child got a quality public education. If there are issues with law enforcement and their presence in schools, it seems to me that that would fall under the umbrella of ensuring the quality public education that fully prepares children. That would fall into that category, into those categories, and they would have to be addressed based on obviously the needs of the school and the children.
One other thing I saw in the comments, somebody asked about other states. Many other states have updated their constitutions over time. So we looked at the 50 states, at the language that different constitutions have, and we've taken the strongest elements from different ones. And so we believe if we were to amend this constitution as we proposed, it would take Minnesota from near the bottom to first place in the strongest constitutional provision for education. I mean, ultimately, what is our constitution meant to be? It's meant to be an expression of our values. So the people of Minnesota would say education is our highest priority as a state, educating all of our children. And we're going to put the whole resources of the state behind making that happen. And we think that can be very powerful and transformational over time. And one other thing I'll just add, since we announced this in January, it's quite exciting. We've had advocacy groups in several other states reach out and say they want to do this in their state too. So I'm hoping no one beats us and gets it done before we get it done. But you know, there is momentum building for making education a civil right, quality education a civil right.
This is really exciting, and I'm sure many people are getting excited and wondering how they can help. So in the chat, I think Beth has put the website where they can go. And so if there's any other way that we can help or support you, you can let us know.
Well, I mean, I think you have I believe your organization gets involved in legislative issues. And if you say that this is a priority for your organization to make a quality public education a civil right for all children, that would be great. The more organizations that are expressing that view, the better our chances are of getting this done.
Organizations and individuals. Don't forget the power of the individual.
It's a very good point. You know, it's funny, you know, Alan reminded me just with this comment there, we had a hearing on this. So we were very busy advocating for this in the spring, and then COVID hit and everything had to, you know, press pause. We had a hearing and there were some families that are homeschool families that somebody had told them that if we pass this amendment, then that's going to eliminate homeschooling because their children must go to public school. And this is a right. It's like the right to free speech. You have the right to free speech. It's not the obligation to speak. It's just the right that you have the right to speak. So this would not affect homeschooling at all. But only about, I don't know, 10 or 15 families went up to the Capitol, and you would be amazed at how much attention 10 or 15 families can draw. And it was only 10 or 15 families, and they'd been misled on what this would do. So even the people on this call, if each of you were speaking out about this, that could be very powerful.
Definitely. And right now, as we all know, that information is so powerful. And so giving out the right information is so important. So on that line, some people had asked about how is going to impact charter schools, or will private schools be affected and things like that. So I think that's what you answered.
So
So this is
no,
only
it
going
won't.
to affect the public school system.
So all forms of public schools. So most charter schools are called public charter schools. They're publicly funded charter schools. This is neutral. It doesn't have a preference for a traditional district school or a public charter school. So it won't have any effect that way. It would hold them both to the same higher standard. Private schools are kept separate from this. Will not have an effect one way or the other on private schools, but it also won't cover them.
Well, it won't cover them. One of the concerns that gets raised, that at least has been raised to us, is that our proposed amendment is really just a tool to be used as a first step towards privatization of public education. And nothing could be further from the truth. That it is true that, well, let me put it this way. Under the current Constitution, if the legislature enacted and a governor signed into law some voucher or other privatization program for public education, they can do that today. It is true that our proposed amendment doesn't categorically preclude that, so that if the legislature so decided and the governor decided, they could still do it, with one caveat, and that is found in that last sentence that makes ensuring quality public schools a paramount duty. That is to say, the state would have no higher duty than to ensure quality public schools. And given that high duty, you couldn't go down the privatization road at the expense of public education. It precludes that. And so for those who are concerned that this somehow is going to lead to privatizing public education, I don't think it could be further from the truth.
So another question or comments that we have got is about how, like, let's say we are talking to somebody who doesn't know about this and we are trying to explain why this amendment is important. How can we talk about self-interest that in the long term, this is going to be a good investment, this is going to be a good thing, and long term, we are going to get a good ROI on this. So how would you explain that to somebody, that this is something that we need to do now, invest in now to get the long-term benefits?
Well, the economic research is very clear. And again, Anusha is on and she's one of the experts on this. The economic research is very clear that young people who get a better education are more productive contributors to our economy. They have better health outcomes. They require less resources from the state, either healthcare resources or other resources. They're much less likely to turn to crime or get involved in drugs. I mean, it's overwhelming, the return to taxpayers of making sure that young people get a high quality education. I mean, it's not only the right thing to do morally. If you just want to talk in somebody's self-interest, say, talk to somebody whose children are already grown. What's in it for you? Your children are already grown, they're already educated. Well, it's in all of our interest that our society have more effective contributors rather than people who fall through the cracks. I don't know, Alan, if you had anything.
I would just say, put another way, for me, this is about justice, and educational justice is related to economic justice. It's related to racial justice, social justice, health justice, housing justice. Education and ensuring that children are prepared for the future is at the heart of ensuring justice in so many different ways. And as Paul Wellstone used to say, when we all do better, we all do better. And ensuring that all of our children do better, there's a lot in it for all of us.
That was wonderful. That I think this is a great point to stop. And thank you so much, both of you. This was really very, very informative and enlightening. I'm going to pass on to Srividya.
Thank you, Sally. I is deeply appreciating the insightful presentation provided by our chief guest, and also we appreciate the active participation we received from our community for this interactive session. We would also like to thank Beth Commerce, who was instrumental in getting this conversation underway for our community and sharing with us all the available resources for our participation in this movement going forward as well. We understand that we may not have been able to do justice to all the questions that were posted in this Zoom chat today. We look forward to an energized participation from our community towards the improved quality of education for our future generations to come. We thank you all for joining us tonight, and we wish you all happy and safe holidays. With a quick glance to all our continued sponsorship from our corporate and other partner organizations. Thank you, everyone. And if you would like to follow us, here are the links of our social media, our website, or you could always reach us anytime on our marketing email, marketing@iamn.org, and we will get back to you with any questions that you have with regards to this or anything about IAM. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you all.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.